Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. The May patch is out and we had a bit of a preview already during an opt-in beta, but now that it's released and everything's set in stone, let's dive in and see what's new. Starting with a maybe controversial change to the user interface, a building range indicator has been added in the options. This is similar to some mods that have been floating around that honestly I don't care if people have been using, but in an ultra-competitive situation are arguably cheating by having the game give extra information that makes placing towers, etc. more effective. The devs seem to have responded by just making it an option for everyone, similar to how they handled the grid mod. It feels a bit like a teacher who finds out students have been cheating on tests, so they decide to make the next test open book. I guess that technically stops the cheating, or at least it levels the playing field. Getting into some balance changes though, the first is that the Steppe Lancers gold cost has been reduced by 5. They now cost 70 food and 40 gold instead of 45 gold. I always find it's hard to differentiate the Steppe Lancers role compared to the Knight and Light Cavalry line, and I can't see this having a big impact. With balanced total resources, for example, Knights still beat them pretty convincingly. On the other hand, if you balance based on gold, you can make almost double the units, so obviously Steppe Lancers win in that case, just through sheer numbers. I still think their role is as a weaker, less gold-intensive knight that is better at picking off villagers. A more interesting change to me is to the Cannon Galleon, which no longer have a separate upgrade to unlock. Previously, after chemistry, you then had to pay 400 food and 500 wood just to be able to make your first one. After this change, they're now unlocked automatically when you research chemistry, and like usual, you can still upgrade to Elite Cannon Galleon if you want the extra 2 range. I think this change is pretty obviously meant to break up stalemates on island maps and help players who have won the water transition to actually bombarding the enemy shoreline. But now let's get into some of these civilization-specific changes. Starting with the Burgundians, a lot of the changes were basically what we saw during the April beta. The Burgundian eco upgrades now cost half the food, in addition to being available 1 age earlier. I do think this addresses the Burgundians' early game weakness, which is the right thing to target, and actually overall I really like this change. It allows your smaller economy to handle the resource cost of the techs earlier, and I think it's going to help the Burgundians in the sorts of situations they've been struggling in the most. The Flemish militia's attack against cavalry was also reduced, which I think is perfectly fine, and in large numbers they're a very strong unit even with this change. The Burgundian Vineyard unique tech also now converts half of their food to gold instead of all of it. Now that's still at a 2 food to 1 gold ratio, and there was some confusion about whether this was going to be changed to a 1-to-1 ratio or not. The tech tree doesn't clearly state it, but basically 1000 food turns into 500 food and 250 gold, so again you see the 2-to-1 ratio. That's a pretty big nerf to the one-time boost of the tech, and means you'll need 2400 food or more to get any immediate benefit after paying its cost. To offset that nerf, they boosted the long-term gold generation of the tech for farmers by 33%. And finally, the last change for the Burgundians is that their team bonus for relics had its food rate increased, so it now generates equal amounts of gold and food. As a rough comparison, every relic is now slightly better than adding another farmer to your economy. Moving on, the next change was to the Cuman's team bonus for their palisade walls, and it was reduced from 50% to 33%. The Cuman stats are looking a little rough these days, but I don't think this was meant so much as a nerf to the Cumans themselves as for their allies that could potentially make good use of stronger walls. More building HP also means quick walls gain HP faster, and instead of Dark Age quick walls gaining 21 HP per second, they were going up by 32 HP, which is much harder for attacking units to break through. Even with the reduction, it's still a decent team bonus though. Next up, the Franks have had their unique technologies swapped and their costs adjusted accordingly. Generally, Imperial Age techs come at a premium, and again we see that reflected here. Chivalry in Castle Age was fairly strong, as it saved over a minute in research time for the Cavalier and then Paladin at the start of Imperial. That said, I don't really see this impacting how Franks are played, or even making throwing axemen that much more appealing in Castle Age. Franks are a knight civilization first and foremost, but it is a small way to nerf their late castle and early Imperial cavalry. Franks have been statistically the #1 civilization, and I feel like they'll still be at least in the top 5 and maybe even still #1, but it'll be interesting to see. Moving on to the Incas, we see another top 5 civ is getting a nerf. In this case, their villagers are now only affected by blacksmith upgrades starting in Castle Age. Incas do have cheaper towers, so there's a slight help to tower rushing still, but they'll no longer have villagers with extra armor and attack in feudal, which is what made their tower rush really dangerous. Honestly, I think this is better for the identity of the civilization overall, even if it's a shock to the multiplayer scene at first. The Inca tower rush has really taken over as the default way to play the civilization from what I've seen, and it's a strategy a lot of players find irritating to deal with. Remember, their intended playstyle is as a jack-of-all-trades counter-civilization, not to replace Koreans as the new tower rushing civ. Of course, you still have the anti-raiding benefit for your villagers in the late game, so the bonus isn't completely gone, and I'm especially interested to see if the civilization can still shine when played more standard. The next civilization we'll look at is the Malay. They could probably have used a buff if we're going by the stats, as they're technically a bottom 5 civ. The first change is their fish traps now provide triple the regular food instead of infinite. That's obviously a nerf, but I can't imagine it'll make too much of a difference in the majority of games, and it avoids the whole infinite food thing, which is always a recipe for silly unintended situations. Now, while their battle elephant discount in Castle Age is going to remain at -30%, now in Imperial Age that discount increases to -40%. That's a pretty steep discount, but remember they're still missing all but one of the cavalry armor upgrades, so in the late game it's really a quantity over quality situation. And finally, the Karambit Warrior has had +1 added to their base attack. Their goldless two-handed swordsmen usually get the spotlight in the late game, and it's nice to see that they're getting some other strong options to play with. On the previous patch, you can see 10 elite Karambit Warriors lose to 7 champions, with a little over 40% of the champion's HP left, so not a great trade for the Malay. On the new patch, after the changes in the exact same fight, the Karambits do much better, with comparable losses in this test coming out pretty much even in cost effectiveness. You can tell the change is making a pretty noticeable difference. Now, a somewhat unexpected change happened to the Mongols in that their Mangudai had their speed reduced slightly. I think this is probably just to bring a lot of the cavalry arch-unique units all to the same speed, and they're still faster than knights and other heavy cavalry. Notably, they're now slower than camels, and their hit and run ability should be slightly less effective overall. Coming up next is Portuguese, who were last in Civ win rate on the last patch and absolutely crying out for a buff. The only change they received is that their missed shots with the organ gun now deal the full 2 damage to any unit they hit, even if it's a missed shot. Considering the unit's low accuracy at maximum range, that sounds like it could help a lot against groups of units, but unfortunately the majority of its damage has always come from the main projectile, and every other projectile is basically for show. With Portuguese being a bottom civilization that didn't respond much to the last round of buffs, I don't really think this is going to be what fixes them. It's their early to mid game that's lacking, and that's not when you would be making organ guns. I'd be surprised if this does anything but get people to use the organ gun a bit more often for the next 2 weeks. And finally, we come to the Sicilians. The Sergeant was made a bit more tanky throughout the game, and that was combined with the donjon's cost reduced from 200 to 175 stone. That's important for aggressive and defensive towers, and makes the donjon less of a liability, as you can now build one and start to repair it just with your starting resources. For their Castle Age unique tech First Crusade, in addition to free sergeants from town centers, it now makes your units permanently more resistant to conversions as well, similar in effect to Faith. They also now have the Siege Onager upgrade, giving them at least one powerful late game unit to build their army around. It's a very expensive upgrade, so you won't see it that often, but it is nice to have the choice. So overall, I think the right civs were targeted for changes, though I think some of the balance adjustments were a bit too conservative. That said, I expect the ones to Incas, Burgundians, and Sicilians are all going to have a pretty major impact. In addition to the balance changes, they also added a few new maps. Crater is an interesting one, with everyone starting off in a crater, of course, and needing to move out to the edge for a long-term wood source. It's like a reverse Oasis with the trees on the outside of the map, although unlike Oasis, it's very difficult to wall. That should lead to aggressive play, and there's lots of elevation change in the middle for archers to take advantage of. Crossroads is another new map with fishing and again trees exposed away from the starting town centers. Like Craters, I expect this is one that's going to reward aggression, and you should see lots of fighting over the middle forests. They also added the map Michi. I can hear a lot of people groan already, but tons of players loved this map back in the day. It's the ultimate no-rush map where you have a massive forest separating each team. You basically have to wait until Imperial Age to cut through with onagers or trebuchets. Of course, these days onagers can cut through, so you don't need to only play siege onager civilizations like you did in the past. Pro tip, if you're playing this map, don't forget to make outposts along the forest in Castle Age and upgrade your building line of sight. The next map is Team Moat, and this one has a pretty self-explanatory name. Everyone gets a moat that you can use to help wall off early, but you do have to leave the safety of it if you want to get resources in the long run. And finally, there's Volcanic Island. On this map, all of the trees are in the middle and give you something to fight over, while the stone is all on smaller outlying islands. This may be the most aggressive of the new maps, as players' first lumber camps could be nearly in sight of one another, with a very difficult area to wall as well. The Inca Tower Rush would have been pretty crazy on this one. We'll wrap up with the event, where there's a new cheat code to turn camel units into flaming camels and some new profile icons, among some other small things. Notably, they have some older rewards from previous events that you have a second chance to unlock, which suggests that future events could be recycled old ones. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as the inability to unlock the going above and beyond cheat code for a built-in 256 times mod has been something that many people, including me, have been asking for. Even now though, if you didn't unlock that cheat code in the event a year ago, you still don't have access to it. So that's a rundown of the May patch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.